Final update, AIO, my fiancé asked me not to wear white to our wedding. This situation feels like a living nightmare, and it's as though everything I feared about my relationship with Edward, 28 years old, has come to life, thanks to his overbearing mother, Brenda, 53 years old. I'm 27, and I've known Edward since high school. Our relationship has been full of ups and downs, and we even broke up once because of his mom. She didn't want us to be together. She convinced him we were too young to know what love was, too naive to make that kind of commitment. Her words were persuasive enough to make him end things with me, and so we went our separate ways. After we each went to college, time passed, and by my sophomore year, we started reconnecting online. Edward reached out, apologizing, saying he missed me and that he regretted how things ended. I was hesitant at first, but eventually, we began talking again. And eventually, we got back together. And that's when things got really bizarre. The moment Brenda found out we were back together, she literally cried. She wept as if her world had ended and then accused me of doing witchcraft on her son, claiming I had cast some sort of spell to lure him back. I was stunned, but I kept calm, even though every part of me wanted to scream. I've always respected her, out of respect for my own mother, and because that's how I was raised. You don't challenge your elders. But in this case, she clearly saw that as a weakness, and I could feel her taking advantage of it. Since we've decided to give our relationship another shot, Brenda has been relentless. She's tried to set Edward up with women from her church, from her job, and even asked her friends if their daughters could try to date him. Every time Edward turns them down, but instead of backing off, Brenda simply accuses me of being controlling. Edward has told her multiple times that he's happy with me and to leave us alone, but it's clear she isn't taking him seriously. It's exhausting to be in a relationship with someone who doesn't fully stand up for me in the face of their parents' interference. I've tried to be patient, but at this point, it's beyond frustrating. 3 months ago, Edward proposed, and I thought that would change things, that maybe Brenda would respect us and our decision. But no, it only got worse. She didn't show up to the engagement party. Fine, I wasn't expecting her to, but she also didn't attend the family dinner where both sides of our families were supposed to meet. That one hurt. Edward's father, who I've always had a good relationship with, came and apologized on behalf of his ex-wife, and I told him not to worry about it, but in reality, I could feel the tension in the air. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The real problems began when Edward finally decided to confront his mother. He could no longer ignore the damage she was causing to our relationship. When he spoke to her, she told him about how she got pregnant with him before marriage and how she never had the wedding of her dreams. She said it was triggering her to see us happy, to see us plan a future together. Her excuse for her behavior was that she had a shotgun wedding at the courthouse, and because of that, she didn't get her moment. She asked that I wear soft pink or lavender to accommodate her and that she wear white. I couldn't believe it. She didn't even have the decency to just be happy for us. She wanted to make the day about her in a way that I just couldn't accept. But the worst part? Edward agreed. He didn't ask me, he just told me that his mom could walk me down the aisle so she could have a moment in the spotlight. I was livid. I told him there was no way in hell that was going to happen. It was my day, and I would not allow her to hijack it. That led to a massive argument where Edward accused me of being petty and selfish. He said I was being unreasonable and that I should compromise for the sake of his mother. It felt like he was more concerned about keeping her happy than standing by me, his fiancé, his partner. I couldn't understand how he was willing to fight for her, but not for me. The argument was heated, and honestly, at one point, I thought we were going to break up. We both agreed to cool off, but even then, I knew something fundamental had shifted. I felt like I was losing him to her. Now, everything feels uncertain. We're in a weird limbo. I still love Edward, but I'm beginning to see just how much he lets his mother control our lives, even when he insists he doesn't. I can almost picture her sitting at home, a twisted grin on her face, knowing she's slowly driving a wedge between Edward and me. And the worst part? I can't do anything about it. I can't change how she manipulates him, and I can't change how he lets her. I've tried to explain how it makes me feel, but he doesn't fully get it. I'm not sure if he ever will. Part of me is wondering if I should just call off the wedding altogether. Am I being dramatic? Is this just a color preference, or is this a red flag? Should I just walk away before I lose everything? I can't keep living in the shadow of his mother, trying to please her while sacrificing my own happiness. I've tried to make this work for so long, but at what cost? Update 1. Hey everyone, I'm not sure if this is the update you were expecting, but here's what's happened since my last post. The emotions have been all over the place, and I've tried to keep it together long enough to really think through the situation. I finally sat down with Edward after work, but I'd spent the entire evening at the gym first, trying to work off some of the anger that was simmering in me. By the time I got home, I was calmer, but still furious. We talked about everything, and I laid out the points I couldn't articulate before when the rage was clouding my judgment. Edward came home looking guilty, and it was clear from the moment he walked through the door that he was feeling anxious about what was to come. He admitted that he'd mentioned our issues to a coworker, trying to explain my side of things. Apparently his friend, bless his soul, had gone off on him, calling him cringy for allowing this to continue. That alone sent me spiraling. It's one thing for me to voice my concerns, but when another man says it, suddenly it clicks for him? That stung more than I care to admit. I started with one of my main concerns. Edward is far too easily manipulated, especially by his mother. It hurt even more when I realized that he listens to any man, anyone else, before taking me seriously. He knows how much I've been hurting, yet he still turned to a stranger for validation. Even though his friend agreed with me, it didn't change the fact that Edward hadn't been listening to me, the person who's supposed to be his partner. This realization was hard to digest. Next, I pointed out how his mother has been actively trying to break us apart with these ridiculous demands. He was a bit more open to this idea now, especially after hearing how it looked to someone else. I made the analogy that it was like a father trying to remove the bride's garter at the wedding, a completely inappropriate and invasive request. That seemed to get through to him, at least for a moment. Then came the hardest part. I confronted him about how he'd agreed to his mom's insane request before even speaking to me. He insisted that he hadn't agreed, but that he'd only told her he'd check in with me about it. I asked him, though, how he couldn't see the sheer absurdity of having his mother walk down the aisle at our wedding. I told him that no matter how he looked at it, it was creepy, and if he didn't straighten up, there wouldn't be any wedding at all. At first, he didn't get it, but finally he agreed, his tone shifting to something more serious. Then, I gave him a wake-up call about how blatantly obvious it was that his mom hated me. I explained that her refusal to show up to important events like the engagement party or the family dinner, while demanding to wear white on my wedding day, wasn't just odd, it was downright disrespectful. He tried to deny it, saying that she hadn't shown up because seeing me in white hurt her. I asked him, "Do you hear what you're saying? Your mom is making it clear she wants to be the bride. She can't stand that it's me, not her." That finally seemed to click. A light bulb went off, and I saw a small shift in his eyes. The conversation then moved to what role his mother would play in our future. Would I always have to take a back seat to her? Would she be a constant presence in our marriage, in childbirth, in Mother's Day celebrations, always undermining my place in his life? He reassured me that this wouldn't happen, and that he understood how badly he had messed up. He said he was just trying to keep the peace between us and his mom, but I called him out on it. "You've been trying to keep her happy, but all you've done is make me miserable. I can't live like this anymore." He said he was sorry and promised that he didn't want to make me unhappy. We came up with a plan for the future, agreeing that no major life milestones, whether it's the wedding, a pregnancy, or anything else, would involve his mother unless I was comfortable with it. And honestly, I won't be comfortable unless she changes her behavior entirely. When I asked what had caused him to finally see things my way, I got the answer I was expecting. She cried. Of course she cried. Edward's mom told him how her baby was being taken away from her, how she had never had the wedding she wanted, how Edward's father had left her, leaving her with no one. She even said she felt sick and just wanted to experience a real wedding before she dies. She's perfectly healthy, but okay. I wasn't buying any of it. I told Edward that if he let that manipulate him, what would stop her from doing it again and again? He told me that his dad and friend had given him a reality check, telling him he was about to lose me if he didn't make a change. So, I laid it out. Today was the final straw. I wasn't going to go through with this engagement unless he proved to me that he was serious about putting me first. I told him there were 4 things he had to do if he even cared about saving our relationship. He had to go low contact with his mom and stop letting her make any decisions about our wedding. I told him we'd postpone the wedding for at least another year to see if he really followed through on this promise. He had to go to counseling, both individually and as a couple, and he had to sit down with his mom and have a conversation about her behavior toward me, with me present. Every time he went to talk to her alone, he came back with a new excuse about why he didn't confront her. That had to stop. But he had to establish strong boundaries with her and learn to keep them. He agreed to everything. But then came the worst part. I showed him the Reddit post. I had been dreading this moment, but I felt like it was necessary. I watched as he read through the comments, each one more brutal than the last. I could see the discomfort in his eyes as he read people calling him a mama's boy, and worse. He was visibly hurt when he saw the comments suggesting I should leave him. He read for a while, then finally saw someone call him a spineless "see you next Tuesday." He handed me the phone, clearly upset. He said it was harsh, but I needed him to see just how crazy this situation looked, even from the outside. It hurt him, but in a way, I think it was the wake-up call he needed. We called his dad, Dan, who I'm no longer calling my future father-in-law unless he supports me in this. Dan gave Edward another talking to. He was relieved that Edward was finally waking up. We agreed to confront Brenda tomorrow, with Dan and Edward's aunt by our side. My dad is coming along for support. Edward told me that he would tell his mom that under no circumstances would she be allowed to make our wedding about her. He also said that if she tried to guilt trip him or cry, he would go no contact with her. I feel conflicted. I never imagined I'd be in this position, getting a man to stop talking to his own mother. But I've made it clear, either he grows a spine or I walk. This is my ultimatum. He says he chooses me. We'll see. I'll update you all tomorrow after we've spoken with Brenda. Let's see if he can stand his ground. Update 2. Hey everyone, I'm back with the final update. Buckle up because this one is a bit long, but I promise it's worth the read. Before I dive in, I just want to address some of the negativity I've received. I know some people might find my story unbelievable or annoying, and that's okay. I'm not asking anyone to believe me, but the messages calling me names, being disrespectful, and telling me I shouldn't wear white to my wedding, that's not something I'm going to engage with. Honestly, if you're that angry about my situation, I really hope you find the help you need. There's clearly a lot of hurt there, and I genuinely hope you heal from it. On a more positive note, I want to thank all of you who reached out with kindness and advice. You guys have been so supportive, and I'm truly grateful. You're the real MVPs. Now, on to the update. After work, Edward and I met up, and we headed to pick up Dan. Unfortunately, Edward's aunt couldn't make it, but my dad was meeting us there. I'll admit, my anxiety was through the roof. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading, but also knew was necessary. I asked Dan and Dad to give us a few minutes before entering, just to make sure we didn't overwhelm Brenda. They agreed and we set off. When we arrived at Brenda's house, my heart felt like it was climbing up the tallest roller coaster in the world, each second stretching longer than the last. Edward was unusually quiet, his face tight with tension. We walked in, and he gave his mom a firm but respectful, "Hey, Mom." The room felt suffocatingly tense, but we sat down and Edward immediately got to the point. He told her that we were there to talk, and she immediately asked, "What's wrong?" Edward didn't hold back. Without hesitation, he told her that her actions toward me over the years had been petty and hurtful. He said it was unacceptable that she hadn't shown up for any of our wedding events. He then asked her outright, "Why do you have such a problem with my name, Fred?" I honestly thought he was going to start with the dress situation, but no, he went straight for the root of the problem. And that's when Brenda's reaction took me by surprise. She looked genuinely confused, as if she had no idea what he was talking about. Despite her years of subtle and not so subtle attempts to drive a wedge between us, she sat there in feigned innocence, claiming she had no problems with me and that she loved me like a daughter. She turned to me as if expecting me to speak, but I just sat there. I wanted to see what Edward had to say. This was his moment to stand up for me. He didn't hold back. He asked her to be honest and reminded her of all the times she had insulted me, both to my face and behind my back. He even brought up how she constantly told him that he could do better than me whenever I wasn't around. This was news to me, but honestly, I wasn't shocked. I knew she'd been undermining me for a while. Brenda's face went from confusion to pure, unfiltered rage. She was livid, calling Edward disrespectful and accusing him of siding with an outsider over his own mother. She kept repeating, "I know she made you do this. She's the one making you disrespect me." At that point, I texted Dan and my dad to come in. Once they arrived, everything shifted. Brenda immediately softened when she saw them. It was like flipping a switch. She turned to Dan and my dad, saying that Edward had walked in and just started yelling at her because of me. My dad gave me a questioning look, and I shook my head to signal that it wasn't the case. With Dan and my dad in the room, things calmed down for a while. But Brenda wasn't ready to admit anything. She continued denying that she disliked me, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. They pointed out how inappropriate it was for her to request to wear white at our wedding. And her response? She said it was shameful that I wouldn't let her son spend time with her. I was burning with frustration at that point, but I stayed quiet, letting Edward take the lead. Then, the real delusion started. Brenda told Edward that she had known from high school that I would be a problem. She claimed that once he started dating me, his grades plummeted, which is a complete lie. She said he stopped making time for his family, also untrue. And get this, she said that he had missed Mother's Day celebrations because of my birthday, which is in April, while Mother's Day is in May. She also said that once we got back together, he completely forgot about her, and that I had made him abandon her. At this point, I was seething. She had no facts, no truth, just a lot of baseless accusations. But I held my tongue, knowing that Edward needed to confront her. When my dad reminded her that she didn't pay for the engagement dinner, so she didn't get a say in it, Brenda deflected, shifting the blame to me. Then Dan, being the straight talker he is, asked her bluntly, "What were you thinking, asking to wear white at our wedding? What is it about you that craves attention?" Brenda's face turned red and she snapped. Her anger flared as she accused Dan of not marrying her properly, saying if he had given her the wedding she wanted, she wouldn't feel left out. Dan called her out immediately, saying that she didn't even want a real wedding, despite him trying to convince her. She started crying, though honestly, it wasn't out of genuine remorse. I'm sure it was just for show, but for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. The way she kept trying to manipulate the situation, the way she twisted everything around, it was heartbreaking. After a few minutes, my dad stepped in to calm everyone down. He told Edward that his mother needed help with her mental health, and Edward agreed. He said he was going to talk to his aunt about getting Brenda some professional help. The rest of the conversation was hard to watch. Edward finally turned to his mother and told her that he couldn't keep defending her if she wasn't going to respect me. He said that for the sake of his sanity and our relationship, he was going to go low contact, LC. Brenda cried harder, insisting that Edward couldn't leave her for dead because she was his only mother. She repeated over and over that mothers are forever, wives are not, and that I was tearing apart their family even though I wasn't even his wife yet. Her words stung, but I remained silent. Edward needed to be the one to handle this. He told her that we were getting married, and that if she couldn't respect me and stop crossing boundaries, she would be completely cut off. He said his visits would be reduced to once every 2 weeks, and that she needed to call him less. The more he said, the angrier she got. She accused me of manipulating him, of turning him against her. She even told my dad that he had raised a demon. My dad didn't hold back, responding firmly, "Watch your mouth." It was the first time I'd ever seen my dad speak to her like that. Edward kept repeating, "Mom, stop! Mom, stop!" But she wouldn't. She continued to scream, and then, just as I had feared, she started hyperventilating. She grabbed Edward's arm, gasping for breath, saying she couldn't breathe. It was as if she knew exactly what would make him feel guilty, and it worked. I watched as Edward looked at me, and I could see the internal battle on his face. This was the moment I had been dreading, the moment when he might flip-flop. He got her a glass of water and asked his dad if he could check on her, while asking my dad to take Dan home. My dad agreed, but before they left, Brenda let out one final dramatic cry, "I can't breathe," as we walked out. The sound of her crying echoed in my ears as we left, and I felt sick to my stomach. Once we were outside, I turned to Edward and said, "I'm sorry." I could see how conflicted he was. He told me he knew she was faking it, but his instincts wanted to make sure she was okay. I asked, "Are you okay?" He looked so sad but shook his head, saying no. I could tell he felt guilty, but I also knew that he was starting to understand the full extent of what his mom was doing to him. After we got home, Edward cried. He told me he was crying because he had seen his mother villainize him, turning the whole situation around and making it look like he had verbally abused her. It reminded him of the times growing up when his mom would accuse his dad of the same thing, just to manipulate the narrative. He realized how much it hurt him to see his mom do the same to him. Edward has decided to go no contact, NC, for now. We've also scheduled our first couples therapy session for next month, and Edward has already booked an individual session for himself. Things are moving forward, and while I know it's hard on him, I'm proud of how far he's come. Dan called us later to let us know he had finally calmed Brenda down. He spoke to her about how her actions were damaging her relationship with Edward, but she didn't want to hear it. She was too deep in denial. I never expected this post to get this much attention, but I'm grateful for all the support. Still, there's this lingering sadness. I genuinely hope Brenda gets the help she needs and that one day we can have a healthier relationship. But hearing her talk about her own mother, about the hurt she carried, made my heart ache for the little girl inside of her. Maybe someday we'll hear her side of the story, and maybe then we'll understand. For now, I'm going back to my regular life. Hopefully, no more dramatic updates for a while. Thank you all again.